Welcome to Paradelphia Radio. This is Rick Pruitt, once again here in the Toxic Studios, brand new Toxic Studios. And I think, after all these episodes, this is our 289th episode. I think after all these episodes, my favorite part of the intro is watching Mike dance to the intro music.
It just has that danceability to it. It's just so much fun that I just envision the people at home dancing as well.
It's like an episode of Dance Fever in the control room when the intro comes on.
Your intro definitely, to me, is one of the better intros out of all the shows. It gets you a little bit hype, and that drop down is just beautiful. That drop down gets you want to just drop to the floor.
Yeah. And
then do the dance the kids do. I don't know what they're doing. Are they still doing the Macarena? I don't know.
Macarena was like 15 years ago, man. I'm saying that like I know what the hell goes on these days, but I do know that much.
All right. If you don't know much, you know when the Macarena was popular.
Yeah.
You were out there doing it.
I was DJing at the time.
Were you really?
I was.
So you were playing that a lot.
Yeah.
At parties, and everybody was just Macarenaing their ass off. Is that how you say
it? Back 2003, 4-ish, I had a gig as an assistant to a DJ. So we were out. We'd do weddings and whatnot. It was a fun time.
Oh, it sounds it.
It was a good time. I saw some shit back then, man.
Oh, I'm sure. I'm sure.
You want to talk about shotgun weddings? I saw some literal shotgun weddings.
Ooh.
The bride was like 8 months pregnant, and yeah, it was interesting.
Interesting to say the least.
Interesting. You know who the biggest partiers were? I'll tell you this: the biggest partiers at weddings back then, because we had all different kind of races and creeds and religions and whatnot.
Mm.
The biggest partiers were the Samoans and the Islanders.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, we did a couple of weddings for, I think the one was from, not New Zealand. What's that other one over there? Crap.
Zimbabwe?
Not Zimbabwe. It's in Africa, you moron.
Oh, sorry.
Whatever the islands are over there in the Pacific, and in the Pacific Islanders.
Oh, Abu Dhabi.
You're just saying words now. But yeah, they were a freaking ball, man. So
that's awesome.
If anybody wanted that information on Paradelphia, there you go.
Oh man, I'm sure the fans would have loved to have seen some cell phone footage of that. Sadly, that was not a thing.
That was not a thing back then. That was just before cell phone footage.
Yes.
Everything was manual.
Oh, I would love to see DJ Rick in his DJ get up.
Back in the there was no get up. It was it was a pair of jeans and, no Crocs yet. So.
Oh, damn. No Crocs. God damn it. God damn.
You know I had to get that in.
Yes, you did. The last show talked a lot about Crocs.
Oh, well. All right. So tonight, we have a very special guest on. And we talked about this topic a couple of weeks ago. He was supposed to be a guest on that night. And we had kind of a mix-up there. We never got our P's and Q's lined up. But tonight, everything worked out very well. And we have him on the line with us. He is a musician. He is an author. He's a storyteller. And really more than anything else, he's a man who is a product of his land and the environment that he loves. His name is Paul Evans Pedersen, Jr., and he's here to talk to us tonight about the lore and legend of the New Jersey Pine Barrens. Welcome back to Paradelphia, Paul.
Hey, it's good to be back, Rick. How you doing?
Very good, very good. Very good to have you back, man. So, again, Paul, you were on a couple years ago, or actually probably closer to like 4 years ago now, with your book, New Tales from Old Haunts, the Legendary Pine Barrens. And we got into some of the lore and legend back then, but the book is so comprehensive that we couldn't possibly have covered all of it. So we figured we'd bring you back and see if we could touch on some more of the interesting lore and legends of this incredible area that we have right here in our own backyard.
Yeah, the Pine Barrens are it's unbelievable how many stories and legends there are about the Pine Barrens and how they're passed down, down through the years since white people have been here.
Right.
Which is the 1600s. It's amazing.
Right. So to get started tonight, we'll get into the lore and the legends and all that stuff in a few minutes here, but not all of our listeners are from this area. So when we talk about the New Jersey Pine Barrens, some people outside of the area may not know exactly what we're referring to. This isn't just a wooded area. This is so much more than that. So, Paul, can you give us a little bit of background on what exactly we're referring to when we say New Jersey Pine Barrens in terms of the geographic location?
Well, the Pine Barrens are mostly in South Jersey. They reach as far north as almost like I-195. It gets almost up there. But it's 1.1 million acres of pristine forests. And for the most part, it's mostly uninhabited. The people that do live in the Pine Barrens have their own special ways. And it's an amazing place, man. I mean, there's almost 18 trillion gallons of fresh, pure water under the forests.
Right.
And they're now finding that this aquifer stretches out under the ocean.
Oh, wow.
It's a lot bigger than people originally thought, even up to recently. So it's the last wild place of this size on the East Coast.
Right.
And it's mostly comprised in South Jersey, in the 5 or 6 South Jersey counties, and it's a special place. It's still as wild as it was when the Indians inhabited it.
Now, you say the people that live there are unique, and that's true. And one of the other things about the people living in and around the Pine Barrens is that there's a certain pride that they have to living there. It's not something that they take lightly. It's something that they look at as a badge of honor. Why do you think that is?
It's because for a long, long time, people that lived in the Pine Barrens and who are now affectionately called Pineys, but it wasn't so long ago. If you called somebody a Piney, that was a derogatory term. And we had a governor back here at the turn of the 20th century, in the early 1900s, that tried to sterilize the Pineys so they couldn't reproduce, because he was convinced that everybody down here was an idiot and an imbecile. Yeah, that's exactly how it was thought of.
Wow.
And basically, it's people that just wanted to stay out of, the towns and stuff and do what they do their way.
Right.
And you had a lot of farmers and cranberry growers and, blueberry growers and stuff like that wanted to live, life their way under their terms.
Right.
And that's basically the people that live in the Pines are still the same way. They live off the land. And, they make their living off the land and try to carry on these old family traditions that's getting harder and harder to carry on,
Yeah. And a lot of these...
It's getting crazy.
And a lot of these families are generational for decades, if not hundreds of years, right?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
In fact, I think
There's a lot of families.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
There's a lot of family names that go back to the, 1700s, 1800s.
Mm-hmm.
Bozarth, Applegate, there's a bunch of them.
Right. And
they're old piney names and piney families. Suey, that's an old name from way back.
Mm-hmm.
Ken Suey's a good friend of mine. And his family goes way back to the 1600s.
Oh, wow.
So these are people that, enjoy it and pass the land down to their kin. And, Gary Giberson, he's the mayor of Port Republic. His family's been here since the 1600s. So it's rich in tradition.
Yeah. So when, you mentioned the personal freedoms, I guess that was one of the selling points of the Pine Barrens back in the days when we were having a lot of the immigration coming over from different countries and settling in the U.S., specifically along the East Coast. But was there any other considerations as far as living in the Pine Barrens besides the freedom and the space, I guess, between you and your neighbor? Was there anything physical?
A lot of it was, if you look at the first glassworks, which is when Caspar Wister started the glassworks in Alloway's Town. That was in like the early 1700s, 1739, I think it was, or 1738. Mm-hmm. And nobody could understand why he would start a glassworks in Alloways Town, which is basically in the middle of the Pine Barrens swamp. Why would you set up a glassworks where you were going to sell stuff, to the people in Philly or whatever? Why would you set up a glassworks so far away from where people are? And the reason was because you weren't allowed to make stuff in this country. It had to be imported from England because we were still a British colony.
Right.
So making wares and making anything was against the law. So the Pine Barrens was actually a huge hideout, and people would start the businesses and out in the Pine Barrens and kind of, deal with people in the pines as a barter situation, or sneak their wares into the chain of wares in the cities.
Right.
So it was kind of like a pirate's haven, really.
Yeah.
To get away from the English taxes and the laws that said, you weren't allowed to make things unless you paid, ungodly taxes and stuff like that. Right. And of course, that's why we broke from the English in the Revolutionary War.
And I suppose that speaks to why they wanted so much isolation, was to do things like that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Set up those businesses.
And a lot of people swear that's why how the Jersey Devil, that's one of the ways the Jersey Devil legend was started, was to keep people out of the woods. Scare people out of the woods so that things could get done back in the woods without too many prying eyes.
Right. So let's dig into that a little bit. And that's always, when you talk about the paranormal, no matter where you're talking about, that's always a consideration that they're making. You talk about it with Bigfoot, you talk about it with almost anything, where it's the equivalent of telling your kid a scary bedtime story to make sure he goes to bed. You
right.
make up these stories to make sure people don't go into the area that you don't want them to go into. And there's a lot of stories. I mean, better than anybody. There's a lot of stories coming out of the Pine Barrens. How much of that do you think, how much of those stories, or how many of those stories are legitimate, and how many do you think are those kind of quote unquote bedtime stories?
Well, like I said, a lot of stories are made to keep people out of the woods. If you want to scare a bunch of people from a certain area, I got bad allergies already, so you have to excuse me with the cough.
Not a problem.
If you want to keep people out of a lot of people out of an area, one of the things was to always say, well, you got to watch it. There's quicksand back here, or there's sugar sand back here. And I mean, you can navigate it and you can be careful, but most people will say, well, I'm not going anywhere near there. And a lot of the stories out of the Pine Barrens and legends were kept, or were told, to keep people from nosing around where they didn't belong. And the old story about Pine Hill is that that there was a still on every corner from Philadelphia city folk back here making moonshine, illegal moonshine, and a lot of stories about Pine Hill were made to keep people out of there because they didn't want anybody in Pine Hill or in any of the areas in the Pine Barrens.
Right.
And there's a lot of people that say that the Jersey Devil story was made just as, is propagated to keep people from coming around in the Pine Barrens, walking around or exploring, because you never know what you're going to find back here.
Yeah.
And it wasn't too many years ago where they found acres and acres of marijuana growing back here. It was cultivated. There were tents set up, so it's not just moonshine. Who knows what else is back here, right?
Right. It's a million acres. You could be having just about anything.
Yeah.
So talking about the Jersey Devil, that's a tried and true, well-known story, at least in these parts, and I'm sure in general circles as well. What is your theory on that? Do you think that was something that was a made-up story, or do you think there's legitimacy to that? Well,
you know what I tell people is they ask me, do you believe in the Jersey Devil? And I say, well, people are seeing something.
Right.
The old story is, it's the 13th son of Mother Leeds that lived, in Leeds Point. That's why it's called Leeds Point. And she was pregnant for the 13th time and was sick and tired of being pregnant and tried to feed all these kids. And she cursed it and said, may this child be a devil. And, there's a couple legends about it. One is that he killed everybody in the room when he was born. He was born as the Jersey Devil. And the other story is he morphed. He was born normal and morphed into this winged creature and didn't harm anybody and hasn't harmed anybody.
Mm.
So there's basically two different stories how it first started. But the thing about the Jersey Devil being born in the 1700s is, the Lenni Lenape had a word for the Pine Barrens, which was papoosing, and it meant place of the serpent. So, even the Native Americans have seen something in the region of the Pine Barrens, and that goes back, hundreds, thousands of years.
Right, and it's one of those things.
Now, also, if you look up, if your listeners look up the word Dimorphodon, and if you Google that, you will see a creature that's a prehistoric creature from the last ice age that looks exactly like as people describe the Jersey Devil. It's got the head of a horse, wings of a bat, long tail, And so if there was ever going to be a place that something could cross ages, the Pine Barrens would be that place because it's got everything there for it. Food, water, and, it's pretty uninhabited.
Yeah, and the thing about that, is as opposed to having it just be a story that scares people out of the woods, like you're saying, people have seen something. People have seen this thing or something that they think is the devil. And it's not just down in the Pine Barrens. They actually had sightings in the early 1900s in and around the town I actually live in, about 5 or 10 minutes from here, in Haddon Heights, Haddonfield, Camden, Woodbury.
Oh, yeah. When you had a super week of 1909, was from January, I think, 15th to January 23rd, something like that. And you had people from Leeds Point or, the Atlantic City area all the way to Chester, Pennsylvania to see this thing. Hundreds and hundreds of people saw it. Joseph Bonaparte, Napoleon's brother, actually shot at it and was said to have put a cannonball through its wing, and it still flew. So, I mean, you have cops have seen it, mayors, people from all walks of life have seen what they describe as, this thing we call the Jersey Devil.
Right.
So it's not something, drunks or people on drugs or, people wanting to make up stories have seen. People swear they have seen it. And during some of my book signings, well, not during some, during every one of them, I've had people stand up and tell me they've seen, they describe creatures.
Right.
And I asked them, would you go on record? No. They don't want to talk about it.
Right.
Because, you meet somebody that says he saw the Jersey Devil and right away, where's the bong?
Right. Well, right. And the other criticism, I guess you'd call it, of people who do that is that they want some kind of recognition or they want a credit in your books or whatever. They want to get on a TV show. But you have a lot of these people, like you just say, that say, yeah, I saw it, but I don't want any kind of publicity. I'm letting you know.
Exactly.
But I don't want my name out there.
Exactly. Right. And it's the same with Bigfoot. I'm sure a lot of people have seen something. There's too many stories about people seeing the same thing. And when you have so many people that have seen something, they are seeing something.
Right.
Now people expound on it and exaggerate it, but you can tell when somebody's putting you on. And I've seen people stand up in a room of 300 and 400 people, and you can look at their eyes. They're not kidding you. They saw something.
Right.
They're not standing up and making a fool of themselves in front of a library full of their neighbors and people they know. If it was just a BS story, they are convinced they've seen something.
So with this thing,
and I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, you're. If you talk over me or I talk over you, it cancels. it like hangs up. It's weird. But I know one guy in particular, and this guy is the straightest shooter there is. And he finally told me, after years of knowing him, an experience he had where he saw something swoop in to like a herd of deer and the deer spread in all directions. And for that to happen in the situation that he saw this, and he saw something,
right.
and I have to believe what he saw was, as he was telling me, it was the Jersey Devil, or something that is that big and that big of a wingspan that would scare a herd of deer and scatter them in all directions like that. Usually they all run together.
Yeah.
These deer were so scared they all went like out in a circle. And that was amazing to me, coming from this guy. Because this guy, there's nobody straighter. Yeah. I mean, he almost just lives 100% off the land. He's a real, woodsman kind of guy. Mm-hmm. And he doesn't exaggerate stuff.
Right. So with this legend being around since the 1700s, do you think this is something that has a breeding population out there? Wouldn't it need to have some kind of breeding population?
A breeding population?
Yeah, I mean, is this one creature that's lived for 300 years?
That's a lot of people ask me that. How does this thing replicate itself if there's only one? And that's the mystery. That's the really crazy. That's the unanswerable thing. What we're dealing with here.
Right. And
when you look at that, we either have something that has lived for thousands of years, or, and it's funny because the Jersey Devil shows up every once in a while in like bulk. So maybe you have somebody getting one of these hammerhead bats from Australia and letting it go and having a couple years of Jersey Devil.
Right.
I've thought of that too, because the hammerhead bat, if you look at it, it's big. I mean, it's 4 foot. It stands 4 feet high.
Yeah, I think we've had pictures of that on the show.
And it does have the head of. I'm sorry.
I think we've had pictures of that on the show when we talked about the devil before.
Yep. So you could have something like that. Who knows?
Right.
But I've always asked the question. There's got to be a nest of them. How are they reproducing? Or it's somebody throwing something into the mix.
Right.
Or you have a creature that science has until now figured out. How can something stay alive so long?
Yeah.
Or maybe it can replicate itself.
So Mike is showing for our viewers on Twitter and Facebook and YouTube. Mike is showing on the screen a hammerhead bat. So that's what that looks like, and you can see how that may look like the Jersey Devil with a horse head and wings and so forth.
Exactly. Now, if you saw that thing flying at night or at dusk or early in the morning, and you were out hunting and maybe not so lucky that day, all of a sudden it becomes 9 feet tall.
Right.
And that's how stories and legends and stuff like that. Most stories and legends and stuff around the Pine Barrens are based on fact.
Right.
Now they might be stretched a little bit, and chapters added, but people are seeing something out there. There's just no two ways about it. People have seen something in the Pine Barrens.
Yeah.
And who knows what it is. And it's part of the fun of living here.
Right. So with an area that old and a population that's been there for generations, there has to be a lot of good ghost stories coming from the Pine Barrens.
Oh God, yeah. I mean, you'll meet very few pineys that won't talk your ear off all afternoon about stuff they've seen and heard, and the ghost of this one and the ghost of that one, and where stuff is buried and all kinds of stuff. Yeah.
Do you have any favorites? Stories?
I'm sorry?
Do you have any favorite ghost stories?
Do I have any favorite? Oh man, I think the ghost of Joe Mullener. That's a great one. The Pine Robbers. That's wonderful. The Jersey Devil. I've always liked that.
Yeah. And
the little town that I grew up in, Haddonfield, the street that I was on had a bunch of ghost stories. I mean, it's amazing. And a lot of those are going into my second book that I'm just about, well, not just about, I got a little bit more to go, but It's winding up.
Okay.
But I'm going to try to incorporate some of those stories that I actually lived through and like witnessed and saw into, some more stories.
So what is the story of Joe Mullener, for those that haven't heard that before?
Joe Mullener was like the Robin Hood of the Pine Barrens, and him and that gang of pine robbers would ride through the pines and steal from the rich and basically give to the poor. They were Tories, and the story was that he was either hung in Burlington or hung in Nesco. And if you drive down Route 542, going through Nesco, there's a blue sign, I guess probably 4 or 5 miles from west of Batstow, that shows you the house where Joe Mullener was captured and supposedly hung. But back in the day when they did public hangings, they put a bag over the guy's head, and a lot of people say it wasn't really Joe, that he escaped, and to this day rides in the Pine Barrens looking for his gold. And there's been all kinds of people and all kinds of holes dug thinking that they've found Mullener's gold. And I actually wrote a song called Mullener's Gold. And, there was 3 separate places that it was rumored that Joe Mullener buried his gold, and that's what got me into metal detective. A friend of mine and myself, yeah, we did. We looked in the Mordecai Swamp and Cold Spring Swamp, and metal detective back there for years trying to find Joe Mullener's gold.
Interesting.
He's one of the legends of the Pine Barrens.
Isn't there
Joe
also
Mullener and Pine Robbers?
Isn't there also a legend of some pirate treasure from is it Bluebeard?
Oh yeah, when they dug the Parkway up, people were convinced that they were finally going to find Bluebeard's treasure, and to anybody's knowledge, none was ever found. But supposedly it was buried. One of the places was what they call the pond in like Cape May Point, and sure enough, there's a body of water there, a pond. But they say that because of the tides and the way things change down there, that the pond is now out to sea, the original one, where he might have buried his treasure. But it's all conjecture. I'm sure people have been digging all over Cape May Point and Cape May Courthouse and all over looking for that treasure, right?
Right. So, I know in Michigan they have these folks who are known as the Melon Heads. Have you ever heard of these people?
Melon Heads?
Melon Heads. They're supposed to be these people that were they're kind of abnormally, almost like something where that movie was it Wrong Turn, where they have like the inbreeding and all that, and they're the Melon Heads with these gigantic heads. But the point is that you have these populations of these deformed, abnormal folk living in the middle of nowhere.
Wow.
Is there anything similar to that going on down in the Pine Barrens, or stories of such a thing?
Oh yeah, we have our I can't think of the name of it now, but there's a tribe. Why do I want to say the Grady Whites? That's the name of a boat. The Jackson Whites. Where my mind is at, right? I'm ready to fish. Oh God, Grady Whites. Now we have a tribe of people that are referred to as the Jackson Whites, and they were supposed to be, like a family or a tribe of albino people that would, bludgeon you to death for 3 cents. And, they came from the Ramapo Mountains. But then a lot of people, when I was growing up, that was one of the stories that like maybe my parents or people that knew my parents told me to keep me out of the woods, because I was always going down there. And they would tell you the Jackson Whites will get you. I said, what are you talking about, the Jackson Whites? Oh, yeah, it's this weird tribe of people, man, that live back in the Pine Barrens, and they're always looking for kids from Collingswood and kids that they can rough up and rob. And to this day, I'm always still, it gets ingrained in your head. Mm-hmm. And you're still, wondering about these Jackson Whites, and you hear a bunch of roughhousing going on, you think, But yeah, that was one of the first stories I heard about the Pine Barrens.
Right.
was the Jackson Whites.
Interesting.
And I read a couple articles about people that are up from the, North Jersey, up near High Point State Park, that are scared to death to go anywhere off the main roads because of the Jackson Whites. So there again, you don't know if you're talking about a legend or if these people are still up there.
Yeah, I mean, you hear real life stories of these things happening, and yeah, it's kind of one of those things where is this fact or fiction?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, I've read, legitimate magazine articles that there are people that are in this tribe or whatever it is, in a group of people.
Right.
And if they come upon you, you stand a good chance of not coming back out of the woods.
Right.
But I mean, we were told all kinds of stuff to keep us out of the woods. We were told if the Stadies catch you back there, they'll throw you in a trunk. They'll bounce you up and down the roads until you're half dead and bruised up, and then they'll burn your bare ass with a paperclip. I heard all this stuff, right before I got my license, and that might be the telltale thing right there.
Right.
Was my father making sure I heard these stories before I got my license to go out in the woods? Yeah,
scared straight.
Yep. There you go.
So how much?
And that just goes to show you, what we were talking about earlier, that the locals know to tell their kids all kinds of stuff to keep them out of the woods.
Right.
It's the old thing with the blue hole. Everybody in that area of the Pine Barrens tell their kids, don't swim in the blue hole. The Jersey Devil's in there and pull you down, and you'll drown.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that. So the blue hole is what it sounds like. It's a water source that literally is abnormally blue in the middle of the Pine Barrens. What is that, down in Winslow Township?
Yeah, it's in Winslow Township. It's off of Piney Hollow Road, and it's about 100 feet across, and it's said to be bottomless. It's either a meteor strike or what scientists call a pingo, which is a column of water that was frozen in the Ice Age but has since, defrosted and is now water, and it's hundreds of feet deep. And over the years, they've had people try to find, scientists lower, chains and stuff like that off of boats into the blue hole, and they haven't found the bottom of it yet. Now, there's other people that say you can stand there and see the bottom of it. I have stood there and saw algae, but I never saw, the bottom of it. I saw stuff, grow in there, but I've never seen the bottom, and I'm not going to be the one to swim out there and, check.
And there's a picture of it on our screen here, the blue hole.
Yep. Now, there's a bunch of places people call the blue hole, but there's only one real blue hole, and it's about 50 yards west of the Great Egg Harbor River, where the Great Egg Harbor River goes under Piney Hollow Road. And that is the original, and as far as I'm concerned, the only blue hole. Yeah. And there's all kinds of stories about the blue hole.
So do you know if anything's living in there?
I'm sorry?
Do you know if anything's living in there? Fish, anything?
I don't know if there's fish in there. I don't know. I've never seen any life in it, and I've been there I don't know how many times. And I've never seen anybody even fishing in it. So, or frogs or anything like that. So, who knows? I'll tell you what, it's weird. That water is definitely different. And I just had this conversation with somebody. That water is definitely different than the water coming that's flowing in the Great Egg Harbor River. The Great Egg Harbor River right there is cedar water. And what's in the blue hole is not cedar water.
Right. Has it ever been
what's
analyzed?
What's in the blue hole is... I'm sorry?
Has it ever been analyzed, the water?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know.
Interesting.
That's a good question. Maybe somebody ought to, see.
Yeah.
But you know what? And I hope nobody does. Some things you don't want answers to, man. The world's getting too scientific.
Just keep the mystery.
Yeah. Let things go. Right. Man.
So how prevalent? You mentioned earlier in the show the Lenape Indian tribes that lived in the area. How prevalent is Indian lore in some of these stories that come out of the Pine Barrens? I'm
sure there is. I don't know a lot of Indian lore. There's an Indian lore kind of story I put in my book because it's the only way I could figure out how to write it about how the blue hole actually came to be. Mm-hmm. And I did it on the, what the base of the story is about, some Indian kids pulling a trick on somebody. And they took a stick and made a great big 100-foot circle and told this Indian kid, Tico Tutata, they said, come over here for a second. He comes over. He was fishing in the river. And the kids told him, the elders want you to get all the dirt out of here and empty this hole of dirt. And he says, what hole? And they said, you can't see the hole? Can't see that circle? And he goes, oh, yeah. And they said, well, you got to get all the dirt out of that hole. The elders want you to do it. So he dug and 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 he dug for weeks. And finally, everybody wondered, well, what happened to Tico Tutata? And they went and found him. And here, the hole was now full of water. And he dug all the way down to the Great Lake under the earth. Mm. And that's what started the blue. That's how the blue hole got there.
It's as good an answer as anything.
I'm sorry?
That's as good an answer as anything.
Well, yeah, it's one of the stories in my book, The Legendary Pine Barrens.
Right. So I know there's been a lot, or there was a lot of industry in the Pine Barrens quite a few years ago, back in the 1800s. A lot of ironworks in the Pine Barrens and so forth. But a lot of those towns and a lot of those facilities are now abandoned, or most of them, I would imagine, are abandoned.
Yep.
Are there stories and legends surrounding those?
That's what saved the Pine Barrens.
That's what saved the Pine Barrens?
Yep. The glass industries, there were many glass works in the Pine Barrens. And what they did was they used, the pine trees for fuel. Well, after all these places sprung up and cut down the trees, the old story in 1850 was you could see from the ocean to the river. All the trees were gone. Mm-hmm. They completely cut down the Pine Barrens and used it, for fuel for these glass houses. Well, as they ran out of fuel, all the factories moved west, to West Virginia, where there's a lot of glass works, in Pennsylvania, because they have coal. And as these factories moved west, so did the workers. And all the towns where the workers lived became abandoned. And that's exactly what let the Pine Barrens regrow. If those glassworks hadn't moved west, right. If we had coal in New Jersey, you wouldn't have the Pine Barrens, right? Because those factories would still be there, using coal instead of the pine trees. But as everything moved west, the trees got a chance to grow back, and now there was nobody there to chop them down.
Right.
So that actually let the Pine Barrens replenish itself. Now, we almost lost the Pine Barrens in the 1960s because they were going to put the world's largest jet port right in the Pine Barrens, and a 250,000 person city, to support it.
Jesus!
It was going to be the largest jet port on the East Coast.
Wow.
So the Pine Barrens, we almost lost the Pine Barrens then.
So I guess that was like a grassroots movement to stop that from happening?
No, actually it wasn't the 60s. It was, I think, the 70s. And John McPhee's book, The Pine Barrens, was read by our governor, Brendan Byrne, and Brendan Byrne put a stop to the jetport and made the Pine Barrens, the national preserve that it is. Huh. And that's what saved it.
Interesting.
Yep.
Interesting. So,
yeah, the history of the Pine Barrens and how it's almost been lost again and again. It's amazing, how many people have tried to do this place in, and luckily somebody comes along and writes a book or whatever, right. and saves it, and it's
right. So
we're lucky to have it.
So we're getting towards the end of the show here, but I want to give you a chance to tell one more of your favorite tales about any aspect of the Pine Barrens. One you think would really catch the listeners.
Man, you put me on the spot.
It's like picking your favorite child.
I think my favorite thing about the Pine Barrens is, like I just said, it's still there.
Yeah.
And I mean, you can go. There's places you can go in the Pine Barrens, and you can almost hear the blood run through your veins. I mean, there's no noise at all. Mm-hmm. It's the most quiet place I've ever been in my life. And I played in a road band out in Nashville, and I've been to all the states, and there is no place quite like the Pine Barrens. Right. It's amazing. Yep.
Yeah. It's definitely somewhere that, and again, it sits right in our backyard here, and most people just drive right on through it to get to the shore, but you don't realize that you're driving through a place that maybe you ought to stop and look around.
Oh, absolutely. You know, a lot of my book signings in North Jersey that I've done, people aren't even aware that we have a Pine Barrens. They think it's out on Long Island because there's a little bit of forest out on Long Island they call the Pine Barrens too. But I've asked people a million times, have you been in the Pine Barrens? And then they'll look at you and say, no. And I said, well, have you ever driven down the Parkway? Oh, of course. Well, then you've been in the Pine Barrens. Really? You know, they just don't know that the Pine Barrens exist. Right. And how important it is to the state.
Right.
You know.
Yeah, it's definitely a national treasure, and now it's been set aside, hasn't it, as a historic place, and they can't do any kind of work there.
Right. Well, it's you know, it's a national preserve.
Yeah.
And it's thank God they did it. Because, you know, every year, even with the building moratorium and with all the laws and stuff, every year you see another house here and another this there.
Right.
And there's just so much encroaching on the Pine Barrens. And, I mean, they're putting pipelines up and down these roads before they even have permits to do it. It's really a shame.
Yeah.
And, you know, more people need to stick up for it and speak out about it.
Right.
And because it's important, because, you know, like I said, we lose a little bit of it every year.
Right.
And I want my grandkids, my great-grandkids to grow up and know that they can go out in the pines. And, you know, I mean, you're in the middle of 45 million people, but you can go out there and not see a soul for days.
Right, right.
And, you know, we need that.
Right. All right. Well, Paul, I want to thank you for coming on tonight, and I want you to
my pleasure.
Let the people know where they can find your books. I know you've written some songs. Do you have any where they can find your music or anything else that you've been working on? Because I know you have multiple projects going at the same time.
Well, they can go to Plexus Publishing for my book, The Legendary Pine Barrens, or you can go to my website, downthepines.com. And you can get the music and the book ordering stuff is on there too.
Cool. All right. Well, we'll put links to all that on our show notes, and we'll put a link in there to one of your tunes, because I think those are really entertaining. You played or actually you gave us a disc of them last time we were on, and we listened to them, and it was really cool. I really enjoyed them.
Great, man. Well, it was great to talk to you again, Rick.
Absolutely great to talk to you. You have a great night, and we'll chat soon.
All righty.
All right, take care, man.
See you later.
All right, that was Paul Pedersen, and he's a musician. He's a folklorist. He's a storyteller, an author. He kind of does it all, and it all revolves around his love of the Jersey Pine Barrens. And you know, it's important to have people like Paul, who know the value of a place like that, and they're willing to write about it and sing about it and talk about it. Because again, like he said, there's a lot of people that just, you know, amazingly don't know that place is there, or even if they know it's there, they don't know the value of it or the history of it. And that's a shame, because it really is a treasure of a place to have, especially literally minutes from where most people live in South Jersey. Have you ever been to the Barrens, Mike?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that is not me. I put the picture of him back up, but no. So absolutely. I mean, who hasn't, you know, living in South Jersey? You know, I mean, I think everybody has gone either hiking or camping, either as a kid or as an adult with your own kids. gone out there, and I know that I've gone out there as a Cub Scout. I used to go out to the Pine Barrens.
You were a Cub Scout?
I was a little cubby.
You were a Cub Scout.
I was a Weeblo, which sounds really bad now. But I was a Weeblo.
That's a whole other show.
That's a whole other show. But no, I was a Cub Scout. I never made it to Boy Scout. I kind of dipped out and started drinking. But no, I was, and we'd go through there.
Not many make it through the Weeblo phase.
I couldn't get through it. No, but I was really intrigued by the conversation you two had. I'm glad we were able to get him back on.
Yeah.
It was very, very interesting. And I think it makes it even more interesting for us sitting here in the studio, because we are really just a stone's throw away from the Pine Barrens. So when you start learning a little bit more about it, it hits you a little bit closer to home, because it is. I do have to say, though, Rick, learning about these hammerhead bats is, if I see one of those, I am running.
They are freaky ass looking.
I'm not going to stop. I mean, we used to do the Whitney Payton takeover show, and I remember during that show a long time ago, I learned about fox bats, which are ginormous fox-looking things with wings.
Right.
And this one even is more scarier than that. I just want to say, if I find one of these out in the wild, I am running. I'm not stopping. I'm going to be like Forrest Gump and just keep on going.
Run, Mikey, run.
That's it.
Yeah. There are some crazy ass shit out there, but it kind of speaks to the topic of things like Bigfoot and the Jersey Devil and all these cryptid creatures that people laugh at sometimes, because you have things like
Joe's checking in to tell me I'm still a Weeblo.
Yeah. You have things like the hammerhead was a hammerhead bat and the fox bat and things like that are just so ridiculously creepy looking, and most of the population probably doesn't know that such a thing exists. So if you ever did run across it, I mean, my God, you'd think you were in the presence of some kind of freaking monster.
Absolutely. If I came across this thing, and I just put a picture on the screen, and I didn't show the other one, which is a front view of this thing. I know I'm kind of hijacking it with this thing, but I do want to show this front view that we didn't show during the interview, which is the face of the just look at that thing.
He's adorable.
Look at that. No, he is not.
He's adorable.
He is an abomination. That's what he is. An abomination.
He's adorable. I'm going to get you one for your birthday.
Oh, you know what? You and being Dr. Doolittle at home, I wouldn't be surprised.
I'm going to talk to your girl. We'll find a cage big enough.
You come in here and tell me you're fostering a hammer bat. I wouldn't be surprised one bit. Next thing you know, I see you posting pictures of you laying down with the hammer bat on your stomach.
That can be. Yeah, we talked about a mascot for the studio.
Oh, Jesus.
That can be your studio mascot.
It's toxic.
A hammerhead bat.
I mean,
how badass would that be?
We'd have to dye him green. I mean,
well, yeah. I mean,
or we just buy a giant green hammerhead costume and we make Rick stand out on the side of the road, like outside of the studio,
like the progressive guy with the sign, just
exactly
spinning the sign.
You're just waving people in,
right,
and causing a lot of accidents.
So yeah, it was interesting. I mean, I enjoyed Paul's conversation, and like I've mentioned a few times, and Doug and I talked about a couple weeks ago. The Pine Barrens is one of those places that amazingly hasn't really been dealt with by the mainstream media or by these ghost hunting and paranormal shows. It's weird because they've redone the same show over and over and over and over again 50 times. But a place like that exists that you have all these stories and all these legends, and it hasn't been really touched that I've seen. So we kind of want to dig into that a little bit, and we've got a couple of irons in the fire, and once we get some stuff straightened out, we're going to try and dig into that a little bit more, and maybe do something with that, and make it kind of an offshoot of the Paradelphia show, where we're going to have some kind of maybe video companion where we talk a little bit about some of these Pine Barren legends, either in a short documentary form or something of that nature. We haven't ironed it all out yet, but it's definitely something we want to dig into because there's just so much information there. There's so much material there. It's ridiculous.
Yes. I'm sorry. I'm still just envisioning the dreams I'm going to have later on.
Of the bat?
Yeah.
That happens. Maybe the aliens in your dream will now be hammerhead bats.
Or the aliens will be fighting the hammerhead bats In the air.
That's a sci-fi movie you can write.
Stay tuned.
Stay tuned. Stay tuned. All right, so we're going to wrap things up here for the show for tonight. But I do want to thank Paul Pedersen for coming on. And again, we're going to have his book and his music as links in our show notes this week, so you guys can find all his goodies and things that he does. And he does do a lot of different projects, most of them having to do with the Pine Barrens. So it's a lot of fun to dig into what he does, and he is a wealth of knowledge when it comes to these facts and figures and legends and folklore that come from this area. So again, we want to thank him for coming on and taking some time out of his day and sharing that with us. All right, so we are going to again wrap up. So I want to thank my production crew in the big room over here, and for Paradelphia, my name is Rick, and we are out of here.